Planet of the Apes was never meant to be comforting. It was meant to unsettle you, confuse you, and leave you quietly disturbed long after the screen went dark. Most people remember this movie for its shocking final image. What they don't realize is that the real warning came much earlier, hidden in plain sight. Ideas about power, belief, control, and human arrogance were woven so carefully into the story that studios barely knew how to sell it. This wasn't just a sci-fi spectacle about apes ruling the world. It was a mirror held up to humanity at one of the most unstable moments in modern history. A story released at exactly the wrong time, carrying ideas some people would have preferred stayed buried. Today, we're uncovering the 20 banned secrets and hidden truths of Planet of the Apes that were pushed aside, misunderstood, or ignored for decades. The messages they didn't want examined too closely, the implications that still make this film uncomfortable to talk about. Number 1, Planet of the Apes was almost abandoned. Because Hollywood thought the idea was too smart and too risky, before it became one of the most iconic sci-fi films ever made, Planet of the Apes nearly collapsed at the very first hurdle. The problem wasn't money, it wasn't casting, it was fear, pure uncertainty about whether audiences would even accept the idea. Studio executives struggled to understand how a serious science fiction story could work if humans weren't the dominant force. Early meetings reportedly circled the same concern again and again. Would viewers laugh at intelligent apes? Would the message feel too bleak? Would audiences reject a story that stripped humanity of its superiority without offering comfort in return? The source material already made people uneasy. It treated humans as expendable, history as unreliable, and civilization as something fragile rather than inevitable. Translating that into a major Hollywood production felt dangerous in the late 1960s, especially during a period when studios still leaned on reassuring narratives and familiar heroes. The project survived largely because a small group of creatives believed the discomfort was the point. Director Franklin J. Schaffner pushed for restraint instead of spectacle. He didn't want flashy alien battles or easy victories. He wanted the audience to sit with unease. That choice immediately set the film apart from other sci-fi projects of the era. Casting added another layer of tension. Bringing in Charlton Heston was meant to anchor the film with a familiar presence. Heston was known for powerful, heroic roles. This story would slowly dismantle that authority on screen. Makeup tests nearly killed the project outright. Early ape designs looked artificial and awkward. If the makeup failed, the entire illusion collapsed. That pressure forced the production to commit to revolutionary prosthetics that pushed schedules, budgets, and performers to their limits. It was a gamble that could have ended the film before it ever reached theaters. And once filming finally began, those fears didn't fade. They multiplied, because the deeper the movie went into its themes, the more uncomfortable it became for everyone involved. Number 2, the makeup tests were so bad. The studio thought the film was a joke. Before anyone believed in the message of Planet of the Apes, they had to believe in the faces. And early on, that nearly ended everything. The first ape makeup tests were a disaster. The designs looked stiff, artificial, and unintentionally funny. Executives reportedly laughed during early screen tests, not because the concept was clever, but because the illusion completely collapsed. If audiences laughed at the apes, the entire film would become parody. There was no middle ground. This panic forced the production into uncharted territory. Instead of relying on simple masks, the team committed to full facial prosthetics that moved with the actors' muscles. It was expensive, it was slow, and it placed enormous physical strain on the performers. Actors spent hours each morning being transformed, only to endure long shooting days under hot lights with limited ability to eat, drink, or rest. That suffering shaped performances in a way no one anticipated. The apes' controlled movements and deliberate speech weren't just acting choices, they were survival tactics. Every gesture had to be economical. Every expression had to count. And once the production realized the makeup worked, a new problem emerged. Because if the apes felt real, then the story underneath them suddenly felt far more dangerous than anyone expected. That realization leads directly into the next secret, where the movie's tone quietly shifted into something much darker. Number 3, the film was never meant to offer hope, and that terrified the studio. One of the most uncomfortable truths about Planet of the Apes is that it was never designed to reassure the audience. From early drafts onward, the story resisted optimism. There was no promise of restoration, no suggestion that humanity would rise again through bravery or intelligence. This made studio executives deeply uneasy. Science fiction at the time often ended with balance restored or lessons learned. This film refused both. The world it presented was stable in the worst way possible. The system worked. Authority was entrenched. History was curated. The future wasn't broken. It was functioning exactly as intended. During development, there were internal discussions about whether the story should soften its outlook. Could there be a clearer rebellion, a hint of reform, a moment where the audience could breathe? Each attempt to inject comfort weakened the core idea. The creative team kept pulling back, choosing unease over relief. That decision explains why the film feels emotionally restrained. Scenes end without resolution. Conflicts don't lead to breakthroughs. Truth doesn't triumph simply by existing. These weren't oversights, they were deliberate refusals to lie to the audience. There's no screaming apocalypse, no dramatic collapse, just a society that replaced one ruling class with another and called it progress. And if audiences couldn't find comfort in the story, where would they direct their discomfort? That question becomes impossible to ignore when you look at how the film treats power itself in The Next Secret. Number 4, power is shown as ordinary, and that was the real provocation. Most movies depict power as dramatic. Villains shout, armies march, tyranny announces itself. Planet of the Apes does the opposite. Power here is procedural. Courtrooms operate efficiently, laws are enforced calmly, punishment is justified through tradition. No, one appears emotionally conflicted about maintaining control. That normalcy is what unsettled early viewers the most, even if they couldn't articulate it. The apes don't rule through constant violence. They rule through consensus and routine. Authority is presented as reasonable. Obedience feels expected, not forced. The film suggested that dominance doesn't require cruelty, it requires legitimacy. Once rules are accepted, enforcement becomes invisible. The most disturbing part is how easily this order is defended. Evidence is dismissed politely. Questions are reframed as threats. Curiosity becomes instability. The system protects itself without raising its voice. This portrayal removed the comfort of obvious villains. If power looks ordinary, it's harder to oppose and easier to accept. That idea was far more dangerous than any ape uprising, bringing us to one of the film's most quietly subversive elements. Number 5. Truth wasn't destroyed, it was carefully managed. One of the most misunderstood aspects of Planet of the Apes is how it handles truth. The film doesn't show books being burned or knowledge violently erased. Instead, truth is controlled through omission and interpretation. History exists. Records exist. They're simply inaccessible, reframed, or declared irrelevant. This is far more effective than destruction. You can't fight what you're told doesn't matter. Those in authority aren't ignorant, they're selective. They understand the past well enough to fear it. That fear drives policy. Knowledge isn't dangerous because it's false. It's dangerous because it destabilizes the story holding society together. This distinction is crucial. The film suggests that the most stable systems don't rely on lies alone. They rely on managed truth, enough accuracy to function, enough distortion to maintain control. And that realization opens the door to the next layer of the story. Because once truth is controlled, the question is no longer who rules, it's who is allowed to remember. Number 6, the ending was designed to reframe everything you thought you were watching. By the time Planet of the Apes reaches its final moments, the movie quietly pulls the rug out from under the audience. But what most people don't realize is that this ending wasn't written as a shock for shock's sake. It was engineered to retroactively poison every earlier scene. Throughout the film, viewers are encouraged to see the world through a survival lens. Strange rules, hostile authority, an unfamiliar culture. It feels like a story about adapting to the unknown. The ending flips that assumption on its head. Suddenly, adaptation feels meaningless. Escape feels hollow. Progress feels like an illusion. Behind the scenes, the creative team understood exactly what they were doing. They wanted an ending that didn't just surprise, but unsettled. One that made the audience mentally rewind the entire movie on the walk out of the theater. Every courtroom scene, every rule, every justification suddenly carries a darker implication. What makes the ending so effective is its restraint. There's no speech explaining its significance, no emotional cue telling viewers how to feel. The realization lands quietly, and then it's over. That silence is intentional. It forces the audience to sit with the implication, and that implication leads directly into the next truth. Because once the ending locks into place, the movie's view of humanity becomes impossible to ignore. Number 7, humanity isn't portrayed as victimized. It's portrayed as complicit. One of the boldest choices the film makes is refusing to frame humanity as purely innocent. The humans we see aren't noble rebels crushed by a cruel system. Many are already subdued, conditioned, silent. This wasn't accidental. Early drafts leaned harder into human suffering, but those moments were scaled back. Instead of sympathy, the film chose discomfort. Humans aren't just oppressed, they're diminished. Stripped of language, reduced to routine, and disturbingly, many appear to accept it. That portrayal unsettled audiences because it suggested something uncomfortable. Collapse doesn't always require force. Sometimes it requires resignation, the loss of curiosity, the willingness to survive without questioning. The protagonist's struggle stands out precisely because it's abnormal. He refuses to accept the rules. He insists on speaking, remembering, challenging. And the system reacts not with panic but irritation. Resistance isn't threatening, it's inconvenient. This framing removes the fantasy of righteous downfall. The film implies that humanity didn't fall because it was overpowered, but because it stopped insisting on its own complexity. Once that idea sinks in, another layer becomes clear. The apes didn't win through violence, they won through structure. Number 8. The ape society works. Because it's efficient, not evil. A common mistake viewers make is assuming the ape civilization is cruel. In reality, it's orderly, functional, organized around rules that everyone understands. That efficiency is the real danger. The society has laws, education, religion, and enforcement mechanisms that operate smoothly. Disputes are handled through procedure. Punishment is justified through precedent. Nothing feels chaotic. That stability makes the injustice harder to spot. Behind the scenes, the filmmakers deliberately avoided portraying the apes as sadistic. They wanted authority to feel reasonable, calm, professional. This makes resistance look emotional and unhinged by comparison. It doesn't need constant brutality to survive. It needs participation, belief, routine. And once you accept that, the film's treatment of belief itself takes on a much darker meaning in the next truth. Number 9. Religion isn't faith here. It's infrastructure. Religion in Planet of the Apes isn't shown as personal belief. It's shown as institutional glue. Doctrine defines what can be known. Sacred law limits inquiry. The past is protected not because it's holy, but because it's dangerous. Belief becomes a shield against instability. This portrayal was especially sensitive at the time of release. The film doesn't mock belief. It shows how belief, when fused with authority, becomes a tool for maintaining order. Questioning doctrine isn't immoral, it's destabilizing. Ritual replaces evidence. Tradition outranks observation. Knowledge that contradicts belief is labeled heretical rather than examined. This creates a system that feels spiritually justified while remaining politically effective. Once belief becomes infrastructure, dismantling it becomes nearly impossible. That's the trap the film quietly lays. And that trap leads directly to the next secret. Because when belief defines reality, language itself becomes a weapon. Number 10. Taking away language was the most brutal act in the film. The film's most devastating move isn't physical punishment, it's the removal of voice. Language defines identity, it allows memory, dissent, and self-awareness. By stripping humans of speech, the society doesn't just control them, it erases their ability to resist meaningfully. This is why the protagonist's ability to speak becomes so threatening. It isn't just proof of intelligence, it's proof of history, proof that another version of the world exists. Silence, on the other hand, is manageable. Behind the scenes, this theme was treated carefully. The filmmakers understood that silence communicates loss more powerfully than violence. Watching characters struggle to express themselves creates discomfort that lingers. That realization sets the stage for what comes next. Because once voice is taken away, the only thing left to examine is who benefits from the silence, and that's where the story grows even darker. Number 11, the courtroom scenes were written to feel familiar on purpose. One of the most quietly disturbing parts of Planet of the Apes is how recognizable its legal system feels. The courtroom scenes weren't designed to look alien or theatrical. They were intentionally structured to feel procedural, orderly, and frustratingly normal. From the way evidence is handled to how objections are dismissed, the trial doesn't feel like a sham, it feels official. That was a deliberate writing choice. The filmmakers wanted the audience to feel the slow suffocation of bureaucracy, not the shock of injustice. Nothing explodes, no one panics. The system simply refuses to listen. What makes these scenes especially unsettling is how calm everyone remains. Authority figures don't shout or threaten. They smile politely, they redirect, they frame curiosity as disruption. That politeness makes resistance look unreasonable. Behind the scenes, the writers studied real legal language to make the dialogue feel authentic. The goal wasn't satire, it was discomfort through recognition. Because if law can ignore reality, the next question becomes who decides what reality is allowed to exist at all. Number 12, education in this world exists to prevent discovery. Schools and learning institutions are usually symbols of progress in science fiction. Here, they serve the opposite purpose. Education exists not to expand understanding, but to contain it. What's taught is carefully curated. History is simplified, contradictions are removed. Students learn what to repeat, not what to question. This approach creates confidence without curiosity, which is exactly what the system needs to survive. The film never delivers a lecture about this. It shows it through behavior. Teachers correct questions rather than answer them. Scholars protect doctrine rather than investigate truth. There are no classrooms full of propaganda posters, just calm instruction and quiet limits. The danger isn't ignorance, it's controlled knowledge. And once education becomes containment, the role of science itself shifts in a troubling way. Number 13, science is treated as a liability, not a tool. In most sci-fi films, science is either salvation or catastrophe. In Planet of the Apes, it's something far more unsettling. It's a liability. This portrayal flips genre expectations. Scientists aren't heroes racing toward discovery. They're gatekeepers deciding what questions are allowed to be asked. Knowledge isn't pursued for truth, it's managed for stability. The film makes this clear through subtle reactions. Alarm replaces curiosity, fear replaces excitement. The idea that something new could be learned is treated as a threat to order. What's striking is how rational this feels inside the story. Stability is valued over truth. Harmony is valued over accuracy. And that leads directly into how the film frames authority figures themselves. Number 14, authority. Figures are calm because they're never challenged. One of the most unnerving aspects of the film is how composed those in power remain. Authority figures never seem rushed, never unsure, never emotionally shaken by contradiction. They operate in a world where their version of reality is protected by structure. Questions don't threaten them because questions are filtered before they matter. Evidence doesn't frighten them because evidence can be dismissed. Behind the scenes, this tone was carefully maintained. Actors playing authority were directed to avoid emotional extremes. No anger, no cruelty, just certainty. That restraint makes them more believable and far more unsettling. Once power feels untouchable, rebellion starts to look pointless. And that's exactly the atmosphere the film cultivates. Which brings us to the most controversial choice of all, the way the movie refuses to offer a traditional hero's victory. Number 15, the film refuses to let the hero win, and that was intentional. By the time the story reaches its later stages, it becomes clear that victory isn't on the table. Not in the way audiences expect. The protagonist doesn't overthrow the system. He doesn't expose the truth and spark revolution. He survives, reacts, resists when he can, but the world does not bend to him. That denial of triumph was one of the boldest choices the film made. At the time, this was deeply unsettling. Viewers were conditioned to expect resolution, growth, restoration. Instead, they were given awareness without reward. The filmmakers understood the risk. Letting the hero lose or at least fail to change the system challenged the idea that individual righteousness is enough. The film suggests something far darker. Systems don't collapse because one person sees through them. That refusal to comfort is what gives the movie its lasting power. It doesn't offer fantasy, it offers consequence. And once the film strips away the illusion of victory, the final stretch becomes unavoidable, because the next secrets don't ask how the world works. They ask what happens when it finally reveals what it has been hiding all along. Number 16. The performances were designed to feel restrained, not emotional. One reason Planet of the Apes still feels unsettling is how controlled the performances are across the board. This wasn't accidental. The cast was directed to avoid emotional excess, even in moments that would normally invite it. The apes rarely raise their voices. Their authority comes from composure, not rage. This choice flips expectations. Power doesn't look explosive, it looks practiced. For the human characters, emotional expression is deliberately muted or punished. Fear is internalized, confusion lingers, resistance feels isolated. When emotion does surface, it's treated as instability rather than truth. Behind the scenes, this tone was carefully protected. Actors were instructed to pull back rather than push forward. Any moment that felt too cathartic was reconsidered. The goal wasn't to make the audience feel relief, it was to make them feel watched. This approach strips the film of traditional release valves. You don't get emotional payoff, you get awareness. And awareness in this world is dangerous. Number 17. Memory is treated as a crime, not a resource. In most stories, memory is something to protect. Here, it's something to contain. The past exists in this world, but it's treated like a liability. Ruins are avoided, records are hidden. Questions about history are framed as destabilizing rather than enlightening. Remembering becomes an act of defiance. This is why discoveries are met with alarm instead of curiosity. Memory threatens the story that keeps the system intact. If people remember differently, the present loses legitimacy. What's chilling is how calmly this erasure operates. There's no dramatic destruction of history, just quiet neglect. Over time, forgetting becomes normal. Curiosity becomes unnecessary. And that brings us to one of the most overlooked choices in the film. Number 18. The world feels open, but there's nowhere to go. Visually, the film feels expansive. Every space is controlled, every path leads back to authority. There are no true refugees, only temporary escapes. This contrast is deliberate. Wide landscapes usually suggest freedom. Here, they emphasize isolation. Running doesn't lead to liberation, it leads to exposure. Behind the scenes, locations were chosen to reinforce this feeling. Vast emptiness dwarfs individuals. Civilization feels distant and unreachable. The world looks large, but the options are small. That spatial design reinforces the film's message. Control doesn't need walls. It needs inevitability. No matter where you go, the system is already there. Once escape becomes meaningless, the film tightens its focus. Because if space can't save you, the only thing left is truth. And the film has something very specific to say about when truth arrives in the next secret. Number 19, the truth arrives too late to change anything. By the time truth arrives, the damage is already done. Structures are entrenched, belief systems are fortified. Awareness doesn't bring salvation, it brings clarity. This timing is crucial. The film doesn't suggest that knowing the truth automatically empowers people. Sometimes, it simply explains why resistance failed. The creative team understood how bleak this was. They resisted adding explanation or commentary. The realization is left to sit without guidance. The audience must decide what it means. And that decision is uncomfortable, because it implies that waiting to notice the truth is itself a form of participation. Which brings us to the final secret, the one that reframes the entire experience. Number 20. The film's real warning was never about the future. Despite its reputation, Planet of the Apes isn't predicting what will happen. It's explaining what already has. The film doesn't warn about apes, technology, or time travel. It warns about complacency, about how truth can exist without effect if no one is prepared to act on it. That's why the story refuses to comfort. It doesn't offer solutions because solutions aren't the point. Awareness is. The most unsettling part is how little exaggeration the film needs. It takes recognizable behaviors and rearranges them. Authority justified by tradition, knowledge filtered for stability, memory treated as risk, emotion framed as weakness. And once you see that, Planet of the Apes stops being a classic you admire. It becomes a question you can't quite shake. Now back to you. Which hidden truth from Planet of the Apes surprised you the most, And which one feels uncomfortably familiar today? Drop your thoughts in the comments because the best insights always come from other viewers. If you enjoy uncovering buried meanings, forgotten cinema, and films that dared to say too much too early, hit like, share this video, and subscribe to Vintiverse. There's another story waiting, and the next one might be even harder to ignore.